Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scripture for February the 4th. Today we are wrapping up Exodus 19, going through Exodus 20, and starting Exodus chapter 21. We're wrapping up Matthew chapter 23, and also we're looking at Psalm 28, verses 1 through 9, and Proverbs 7, verses 1 through 5. Now, Proverbs, we haven't hit a whole lot about that. But, the very first words of this proverb are, My son, keep my words and my son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Well, that's a very appropriate verse for today, considering that what we see in Exodus chapter 20 is the introduction of the Ten Commandments and other commandments that God gives throughout the time up on the mountain. And these are, we know the Ten Commandments. They're famous. They're all good. But when you look at these Ten Commandments and look at the other commandments, God begins to give some very specific requirements. And most of the requirements fall into one of two categories: either how you treat God or how you treat other people. You can take the first half of the Ten Commandments, and they're all about that, all about how to treat God, how to show respect to God. And then the second half of the Ten Commandments is all about how to treat other people. And then you look at when he starts talking about the laws of the altar, he starts talking about all those things in the end part of Exodus. Then he also kind of expounds a little bit more on those. Well, as the time in the mountain, and ironically enough, he starts talking about idols and those kind of things. Well, then, if you look in Matthew chapter 23, what do you get from Jesus? You get from Jesus giving these people a hard time for the very thing that God was warning against in Exodus. He's telling these people, don't make these false idols. Don't do these things. Worship the Lord your God only. You will have no other gods before me. And yet Jesus says, you guys have made everything else God but God. You have made giving of dill and spices more important than being the rules as the apple of my eye. You have neglected justice and mercy and faithfulness, and instead you're worried about mint and cumin. And you're teaching people to be even worse, Jesus says. He says, what are you doing? Have you forgotten everything that I taught you? And the answer is yes. Yes, they have. No longer do they look at commandments as the apple of their eye. They look at commandments as these ways for them to exert authority over other people. You've heard the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, these Pharisees are living proof of that. They have forgotten about the fear of the Lord that we talked about yesterday. They've now gone to this place where they believe that the things that were created are more important than that. When God starts talking about these images and everything in Exodus chapter 21, he says, don't be worshiping these things. These things are stuff that have zero value. And you would think that the Israelites would listen to this and would heed it very well, but we're about to see in just a few verses that how quickly we forget. And the Pharisees have had thousands of years to get this right, and they still can't get it. They still haven't been able to figure out how in the world they're supposed to actually keep the commandments with love and with faithfulness. They forget that the commandments, and the whole point of the commandments is just what Jesus said. They're about justice. They're about showing mercy, and they're about faithfulness. Faithfulness is those commandments. How do you treat God and how do you treat others? You treat them with faithfulness. You treat them with mercy, and you treat other people with justice. And they have completely forgotten this. And so Jesus continues to pound on these Pharisees and these Sadducees. Now you say, why does Jesus harp on these guys so much? Well, it's pretty simple. Because these are the guys that are supposed to know better. Out of everybody else, they should know better. These guys are supposed to know the word of the Lord better than anyone. And they do. They can recite scripture left and right, yet they get so caught up that they forget about God himself. We live in this world today that does this a lot of times, that if you dress a certain way, that you're on the right path to righteousness, that if you read the right books and if you do these things, then it's not about chasing God, it's about chasing things and creating these boxes to check. Well, that's exactly what the Pharisees and the Sadducees were doing. They were creating boxes. They weren't creating pathways of pursuit to God. They were creating boxes that would keep them in power and that would help them to look good. That's some pretty harsh words there. Good food for thought. Okay, that's it for today. Have a blessed one. We'll talk next time.